Okay, so I just got back from the ironing board, and again, this is the second steps or the continuation of the rolled collar on a bodice. I'm doing half of it. And so what I did was I just got done pressing all of my shoulder seams open on my bodice unit and my facing unit, and I pressed over the seams that I had made on my rolled collar towards the facing piece. So now what we need to do is we need to stitch these seam allowances onto the undercollar that has this interfacing to it. So again, this is called understitching. We've done it a couple times so far in previous samples. And so what we do is we always want to make sure that we have our seam allowances pushed over towards that facing, and then we do the stitching on the top side, so the front side of our fabric. What we're probably going to, we won't be able to probably get all the way to the tip in here, but what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to work on the inside, and then as your presser foot and as your needle gets closer, you're just going to have to really manipulate your fabric the best that you can, and then when you can't get your presser foot any closer, that's when you stop. Hopefully you'll give this a try. I know that it's probably going to be a little bit difficult because we are working with quite a few pointed areas, and our presser foot needle can only get in so far, but it's always good to try our best. So again, I have my seam allowances pressed over towards my undercollar, which has that interfacing fused to it, and then I'm going to do a row of stitching about 1/8 of an inch from this seam line here. I'm using the seam line as my guide, and I'm going to be stitching about 1/8 of an inch over. So I'm just going to draw a line where I'm going to be stitching there, and how I see this line, or how I keep my distance, is I look through the hole on my presser foot here, so through this hole, and I want to keep that seam line that I've already sewn and pressed open within this circle. Depending on how you have your piece underneath, that seam line will either be to the right, on the right half of this oval shape on your presser foot, or on the left. It just depends on kind of how you have it positioned. I have my fabric positioned that my seam line is going to be on the right half of that oval, and I'm going to be stitching just to the left of that seam line. So I'm going to go ahead and just position my fabric underneath, and I'm going to follow that line that I had just sketched for myself. And I'm going to do a quick back tack at the end of this line, and I'm going to try to keep this fairly consistent from that seam line. And then every so often I want to stop with my needle in my down position, raise up my presser foot, and make sure that those seam allowances are staying pushed to the left side, or towards your undercollar that has that interfacing attached. It's always a good idea to stop every so often and just kind of check yourself, because things can easily kind of jump over back to the wrong side. And the whole purpose of this understitching is to hold that undercollar truly on the underneath side. And while I'm stitching here, I'm really just, with my two fingers, I'm holding this fabric open, this seam open, so that the understitching that I'm putting in really kind of keeps that seam sharp. Keeps it flat, and keeps it open, so that when I go to turn this here in a moment, everything will be laying really flat. So I'm kind of getting to that point in my stitching where I'm meeting up with that corner, and I'm running into some difficulty with just keeping everything flat, so I think I'm just going to stop. What you can always do, if you find that you need to stop early, you can give yourself a little bit of thread, some decent thread tails, and you can go to the back side of your sample and just kind of give that tail a little bit of tug, and it pulls the top thread to the back side of your fabric. Let me see if I can grab it with my scissor without cutting it here. Or I can grab it with my finger. There we go. So I'm just going to pull that top thread, and in my case it's the red thread. My under thread is my orange thread, and my bobbin thread is my orange one. I'm just going to go ahead and pull that thread to the underside of my fabric, and I'm just going to go ahead and tie it in a knot. You need to make sure that that whenever if you stop kind of in the middle of things, that you do continue to somehow tie off that those threads so that stitching doesn't come undone due to stress or laundering and wear and tear. So you want to make sure that you give yourself a way to make sure that that stitch line has been is staying on the area that you want. Alright, so I've done the understitching along like that outer curved edge of my collar. Now I just need to come back and do the understitching along the shorter side that leads to that point as well. So again, I'm going to want to come in from the top side, and what might be a good idea is if we go ahead and try to turn this now. Let's see if this will work. So you're going to go ahead and put your thumbs on the inside and use your fingers to just push those seam allowances towards the undercollar and then turn that inside out. Then I usually use my scissor and just gently kind of push out that tip so I have a nice point at the end of that collar. Just be very gentle. You don't want to accidentally push it too hard and have your scissor go through. Alright, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to have to work a little bit. I might have to push some of it back out, but I'm going to work from the right side of my fabric and hold those seam allowances over towards the undercollar, and I'm going to do a row of understitching again. Trying to hold those seam allowances down on the other side. I'm going to do some back tacking, and this is going to be a fairly short seam just because it was a short seam to begin with, but then I'm probably going to be running into some difficulty with that seam line before it's too long, just with space. Yeah, I think I'm at that point, so I'm going to go ahead and raise that up again. I'm going to do that tie-off method that I had done before because that seemed to work pretty well. I got about, maybe about 1.5 inches before I needed to stop, so it's not too bad. So from the inside, I'm going to pull on that bobbin thread again, which kind of pops up the red thread that's on my underside. I'm going to try to grab it, just gently pull it, and then tie that off in a knot. And again, like whenever you do any sort of knotting, you always want to do that on the inside of your garment, not on the outside. Alright, so I got that needle, or that hole there, and I'm just going to go ahead and tie that knot. And then trim up those thread tails. I want to make sure my thread tails are trimmed on the start of my understitching as well. Okay, so then what you can do is just make sure that this is pressed out. And what I would do is I'm going to take some time to go over to the ironing board and just give this a good press. And what you should have is you should have these rows of understitching on the underside of the collar. It'll be visible on the underside, not on the top side of the upper collar. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and give this a good press, and we'll meet you back here in a moment.